Night settles over the Aegean like a silk veil, the sea breathing in slow, even strokes against dark shores. Stars appear one by one, as if carefully placed by a patient hand. Far above that glittering roof, stories are already woven, but down here, on islands rimmed with pale sand, in hill towns smelling of olive and smoke, the world feels composed, almost held in a gentle pause. You can hear a lyre somewhere, thin and silver in the air. You can hear waves counting time. The wind is soft, the lamps are few, and the old tales begin as they always do, with pride that thinks itself harmless. Before the war had a name, there was a wedding that invited everyone but discord. A mortal king, Peleus, took a sea-born bride whose ankle foam had kissed Thetis. Gods arrived in bright company, crowns and thunder, and dawn light in their hair. Tables groaned with honey cakes and roasted meats. Amphorae sweated resin-scented wine. Torches hissed as if whispering blessings. Laughter rose and spun like sparks in the dark. And because joy sometimes forgets to guard its door, one guest was left uninvited. Eris, whose gift is the tightness that grows in the chest when someone else is praised. She came anyway, moving like a draft along the tent cloth, and laid a single apple on the board, where the goddesses could not fail to see it, golden, heavy, cold to the hand. One word cut into its skin with an unerring little blade, to the fairest. 3 faces turned at once toward the same bright lure. Hera, who measures sovereignty and oaths. Athena, whose eyes weigh clarity and courage. Aphrodite, whose smile warms marble into living light. No laughter then, no music, a stillness like the moment before a bowstring sings. Zeus refused the choice. Even thunder knows some storms are better sent elsewhere. And so the decision slid down from the high table to a quiet slope of earth, to a shepherd prince who did not yet know the size of his own name. On Mount Ida, the grass is soft, the air sap sweet with pine, and sheep move like clouds grazing the hill. There, Paris kept watch. He had the mountains calm, the long patience of someone who had looked at sky for years and found it sufficient. He knew the shapes of weather. He did not yet know the shapes of promises. They came to him veiled in human ease, and then not veiled at all. 3 presences that made the sunlight sharpen, and the wind hold its breath. Hera offered the clean, ringing metal of power. Kingdoms gathered, borders obedient, the respect that arrives and kneels without being called. Athena offered a different crown, unflinching mind, victory that comes through discipline and clarity, renown hammered bright on the anvil of hard, honorable work. Aphrodite did not speak first. She let the hillside silence mend itself, and then touched the air with a softer thread. Not a throne, not a laurel. Promise of a love so luminous, it would make the world around it dissolve into brightness. Not possession, but belonging. Not a prize, but a gravity. On another morning, perhaps the boy would have chosen order and the world would have kept breathing in the same measured way. But he was young, and the apple was heavy, and the heart loves a shortcut to its own astonishment. He thought of songs and evenings and the warmth that turns winter rooms into summer. He thought of being seen and known and gathered into something that felt like home. The apple moved in his hand with the smallest sound, a gold against skin whisper. He set it in Aphrodite's palm. The hillside seemed to breathe again. The other two goddesses learned him by heart in that instant, a quiet inventory that destiny would remember later. Promises, once loosed, do not forget their path. Far from Ida, across a wine-dark sweep of sea, a city sat on a spine of stone washed by two harbors, Sparta, clear-watered, stern, precise in its rituals. There, a queen moved through bright colonnades, light pouring along the carved grain of cedar and the gleam of bronze bowls. She knew how to make a room gentle simply by standing in it. They called her Helen, and even those who had invested no faith in legends found themselves speaking more softly when they said her name. Her husband was Menelaus, broad-shouldered, accustomed to ship decks and the neat order of oars. He valued oaths the way sailors value knots that will not betray them in a storm. To his hall came guests as the season turned, envoys and wanderers, singers who traded stories for shelter. Among them, one day, arrived a slender prince with shepherd's calm in his posture and city gleam in his eyes, bearing gifts smooth as river stones, worked gold, fine glass, words that fit well in the ear. Custom took him in. Bread was set out, wine was poured. The household gods were honored with a pinch of grain and a soft prayer that smelled of smoke and rosemary. The code of welcome, Xenia, wrapped the stranger in ritual like a cloak. Bath offered, seat of dignity, the right questions asked in the right order. Menelaus spoke with him of voyages and winds. The queen listened and, as any careful hostess would, made the hall warmer with her presence, her voice a low music that folded easily into evening. The days in Sparta have a way of being clear. The nights carry stars like good news. Some stories paint what followed as a theft, others as a flight, still others as a beginning, written at the wedding table when the knife bit the apple. What mattered was motion. A ship eased from a Spartan quay on a night soft as breath, oars dipping in a rhythm that would be remembered as both treachery and fate. The sea bore them, as the sea bears everyone, without opinion. Foam at the prow, a lantern cupped like a small moon, the shoreline diminishing with each stroke, until the palace became a set of measured lights, and then a memory. At dawn, a servant found a bed untouched, and a room too quiet. At noon, the rumor had lengthened into a tale that reached the king's ears with the taste of salt still on it. Law had been broken, but more than law. An agreement older than any treaty. The sanctity that holds when one person sits at another's table and is called guest. Pride is red when spilled, but it is colorless when it rises. a heat in the chest, a narrowing of the eyes, a certainty that the world will tilt until balance returns. Menelaus sent for his brother. Agamemnon came from Mycenae with the heavy assurance of a man who has counted stores and ships and found the numbers willing to obey him. His halls smelled of oil and bronze and the long-keeping dust of old victories. He understood that a front ripples outward. One broken vow invites others. One house wronged becomes 100 watchfires. If this theft stood, what door would hold? He spoke to Menelaus in the clean prose of command. Not if, but when. Not tomorrow, but now. Not alone, but all together. He had an old promise to lean upon, a clever weave devised years earlier to diffuse an earlier danger. The oath sworn by the suitors of Helen, that whichever man she chose, all the rest would defend the chosen marriage against any insult. Words said before gods have a way of curing into iron. Messengers left Mycenae like seeds thrown at the wind. They traveled from crag to harbor, from valley to corded palace gates, calling old names that had become proverbs. Nestor of sandy Pylos, seasoned and deliberate. Diomedes of Argos, sharp as a new forged blade. Ajax of Salamis, huge as a gate. Idomeneus of Crete, whose ships knew every seam of the sea, and on a rocky island veined with olive roots, where a small son clutched at his father's belt, while a clever king pretended not to hear the call. The messengers found Odysseus. He tried to wrap himself in the language of ordinary life. A plow in his hands, a field turned in foolish lines, madness claimed as a shield. But duty has teeth. A test with a newborn body laid before the blade stripped the pretense from his eyes. He sighed the way a sailor sighs when the wind insists, and he gave his name to the muster. Across the straits and channels, on the high headland where Troy crowned itself in towers and left-facing walls, another king received the returning ship. Priam had the patience of old wood, and the weight that comes from hearing the names of your sons called from different corners of the courtyard at dawn. He listened to the tale his shepherd prince brought, as a man listens to weather, measured, face unreadable, hands quiet on the arms of his chair. He welcomed the guest who now was not a guest. He set caution in his voice like a lamp in a window, and hoped the light would be enough. Walls are good. Wisdom is better. Pride is loud. Evening comes, soft, blue-edged, smelling of crushed thyme and cooling stone. The harbors of Aulis fill with murmurs and oar creaks, with ropes tightening around cleats, with the small iron music of anchors tested and blessed. Men kneel to lace sandals, tucked notes from wives and brothers folded into belts, small tokens pressed into palms with that urgent stillness that belongs to partings. Fires step down along the beaches, red bowls set on dark velvet. The sea spreads itself flat as a polished shield. Somewhere on Mount Ida, a shepherd prince dreams of a hillside and a choice that seemed for a heartbeat like a private sweetness. In Sparta, Empty rooms hold their breath. In Mycenae, a king draws lines on the waxed board with a stylus and watches 100 small figures become a single shape. In Troy, balconies catch the last light like coins. The gods are not absent. They are waiting for the proper hour. The mortals are not ready. They are already in motion. Night deepens. The wind turns. It carries the salt forward as if offering a cup. And underneath the quiet, a single thread tightens, almost imperceptible. The first pull on a tapestry that will, in time, show ships like teeth along a shore, and a city ringed in firelight. For now, there is only the hush before departure, the long inhale before oars dip, the stillness of a world that does not yet know its name will be spoken in 1,000 tents. Sleep, then, with the sea breathing evenly beyond the dunes and the stars holding their places. The ships are not yet launched, but they will be. Pride has warmed its hands over a small golden fire, and the warmth feels like light. Morning will test it. For this last moment the world rests, and the story gathers itself like a sail waiting for wind. Morning lifts over Aulis with a pale, milk-blue light, and the harbor lies still as a held breath. Hundreds of black-prowed hulls rest side by side, masts thin as reeds against a sky that will not move. Ropes creak softly. Sailcloth sighs. The sea looks close enough to touch, and, for days, refuses to offer wind. Men rise, drill, mend. They stack amphorae, sharpen bronze, say the same handful of jokes in lower voices each time. And under it all, a waiting grows heavier, like water held behind a closed gate. When silence lasts too long, people begin to listen for meanings inside it. A seer stands on the shingle and reads the morning as if it were a page, bird flight, the curl of smoke, the way foam threads itself at the edge of the tide. His words land like pebbles dropped into a bowl. The goddess who keeps wild places has been crossed. The path forward asks a price from the very house that leads. The command tent tightens around that sentence. Pride tastes different when it has to swallow iron. The story that leaves the tent is light on detail and heavy with consequence. The army looks away. The harbor seems to lower its eyes. Somewhere beyond the dunes, a single cry rises and falls and is not repeated. What happened after that is told in different ways by different mouths. Some say a life was taken and the wind returned. Others say a divine hand intervened, substituting a swift-footed creature in the instant before loss. All agree on the change. The flags begin to stir as if remembering their purpose. Rigging starts to sing. First one line, then a chorus, and those who serve at the prow step forward and lay palm to plank, whispering thanks, because the sea now breathes again. Before the fleet can move, names must be counted. A runner arrives with a rumor that the fastest blade is hidden in a place where swords are not supposed to gleam. On an island shaded by citrus and myrtle, a guest sits among bright fabrics and laughter, dressed to be overlooked. A stranger comes with trinkets to tempt a market of delicate tastes, pearls and combs and small bells, and, among them, one honest thing, a spear whose balance pulls at the hand like memory. When bronze touches palm, the room learns the truth all at once. Disguise ends as quickly as a lamp blown out. The sea gains another vow, Achilles, storm-swift, who walks as if he had already heard the drum beat of a future shore. Not all cleverness is welcomed. In the long days of waiting, a prince named Palamedes builds order out of drift and hunger. He tallies grain, invents games to keep restive minds from turning inward, straightens chaos into schedule. For this, he earns gratitude and a shadow. Cunning respects itself and rarely admires rivals. A glance exchanged over a board game becomes a memory. A memory becomes a seed. In war, seeds grow. A wrong coast rises on the horizon before the right one does. The fleet touches at a shore green with unfamiliar hills and is met by a king whose land is not the land they seek. Words fail. Bronze speaks. A wound is given that refuses to close. Oracles turn the sentence like a key in a lock. The one who made the harm must mend it. The remedy is odd and exact. Iron's very dust mixed into a poultice, the same metal that opened flesh asked to knit it. When the pain withdraws like a tide, a path opens. Harbors named, currents described, a reef to avoid by account of oar strokes, a headland that looks like a sleeping bull. The fleet learns the coastline of fate, one landmark at a time. Another omen takes shape on a rocky island where a bow older than any captain hums with a story of its own. A snake's bite burns like a curse. The smell, the fever, the cries become unbearable to those who must sleep beside them. The decision made there will stain many hands. A man of unbending skill left with fire and promises. The bow of a god laid beside him like a companion. The fleet pulls away with unsteady faces, telling itself that necessity is a virtue. The wind, indifferent, fills the sails. Day after day, the oar banks pull, and the sea draws its paths under the keels in long, shining ropes. You can hear oars lift and fall, and the soft run of water along hulls. Sharks turn slow arcs beneath shadows. Dolphins race the prows and peel away. The horizon stays just out of reach, and then, on a morning like any other, breaks open. A long ridge rises, shouldering the light. High walls, red gold towers, a river curling its silver through plain to sea. Those who have dreamed of Troy feel their dreams become weight in their chests. They do not rush it. Even anger learns caution at the edge of stone. The first prows kiss the sand as if asking permission. Shields lift to make a new shore in front of the old one. There is a sentence whispered down the line that no one wants to say too loudly. The first to leap will meet an old warning. Someone does it anyway, because someone always does. He strides through foam as if through a doorway he had been promised all his life, and bronze finds him like a prophecy fulfilled. The army feels the shock travel outward, a ring on water. Rage tries to dress itself as resolve. Resolve tries on the language of patience. From the towers, the city looks back with level eyes. The wind carries no voices, only the faint clatter of something being set in place. A hinge tested, a stone shifted a finger's width, and then left. Inside those walls, a father with a crown touches the railing of a balcony that faces the sea and weighs his choices. Below him, a brother who fights like summer thunder tightens a strap and gives a quiet instruction to a standard-bearer. The guest, who is no longer a guest, walks the colonnade and keeps his eyes on the harbor, as if looking were a kind of apology. Everywhere, lamps are trimmed and shields polished, not for splendor, but to make clear the line between household and storm. The beach becomes a city in one night. Tents rise in orderly rows. Trenches appear as if drawn by a giant's stylus. A long altar is built from smooth stones, and the smoke of first offerings threads upward, asking the very air to remember balance. The ships are dragged high, their bellies chalked and cradled like precious beasts at rest. Watchfires take their places, small bright oaths in a dark that smells of salt and resin, and the sweet thud of ripened figs brought from the last island for luck. Parley comes before pounding. Heralds move between surf and gate, beneath white flags that lift and fall with the breeze. Words are offered that cannot be accepted without unmaking a city's pride. Answers arrive that cannot be received without unmaking an army's vow. The talk is slow, courteous, grave. No one shouts. Everyone hears the hinge turning under the floorboards. When the sun goes down, the plain lies between two brightnesses. Torches along the beach, torches along the ramparts. Crickets pick up their fine-boned music in the dry grass. Somewhere, a lyre strings a low chord and lets it fade. On both sides, armor rests within reach, but hands seek something else. A token pressed between fingers, a knot retied for the comfort of its tautness, a little charm of metal tied to a thong and worn next to skin. Sleep comes in thin slices and is enough. Dawn shows Troy in her true colors, stone the hue of baked bread, roofs sparking under a fine dusting of light, banners turning like leaves. The river puts its shoulder under the plain and moves, unhurried, to the sea. On the beach, the army wakes to the same rhythm. Bread broken, water passed along a line, helmets lifted with the exactness of habit. Orders are spoken once, then again, slowly. Names are called and answered. The air carries the scent of seaweed, crushed thyme, oiled leather, sun-warmed pitch. This is not yet the roar that stories remember. It is the long steadying of breath before the first real push, a careful placing of feet on ground that will soon shake. Pride has already spent its coin. Now, patience begins its work. A single gull turns above the surf and cries once, as if taking attendance. Far inland, a god walks a ridge no mortal can climb, and watches the small, bright movements of those who believe they decide. When night returns, it brings a softer dark. The watchfires blink to each other along the curve of shore, and the sea lays its silver shoulder against sand with the tenderness of a giant, trying not to wake the sleeper in its arms. In that wide quiet, oaths feel like anchors and like wings at once. Tomorrow has teeth. Tonight, the world is a bowl, and the stars are steady, and every tent holds its own small promise. Rest now. The story will move soon enough. Morning unfolds like linen over the beachhead, pale and clean. The sea moves in its old rhythm, and along the sand a second city has taken root. Rows of black hulls resting on timbers, masts pinned against the sky, tents neat as thoughts set in order. A trench curves like a protective arm. A low palisade catches first light. Smoke rises in thin blue braids from cook fires. Bronze is rubbed until it remembers sun. Days acquire a practiced shape. At dawn, bread and watered wine. In the cool hours, drills along the firmest sand. Shields lifted, spears angled, feet learning the ground's grain. By noon, shade, repairs, the soft rasp of whetstone on edge. At dusk, watch is posted by the longships, and the sea does what it always does. It speaks without raising its voice. Between those sure sounds, 1,000 small promises are kept, knots checked twice, or leathers mended. A prayer whispered into the same quiet that takes the gull's single cry. Before the first great push, there is speech, because even anger remembers courtesy at a city's gate. 2 figures cross the plain under white flags that breathe with the breeze. One is broad and red-bearded, walking as if the ground has been measured and accepted. The other's eyes are steady, his words built like ships, balanced, useful, exact. They are received beneath stone that holds its temperature. A king with winter in his hair listens. A prince whose calm feels like summer thunder draws breath as if to answer for the wind itself. In the far colonnade, a woman's step recalls home and unsteadies it in the same heartbeat. The message is the same in every version of the story. Return what was taken, mend what was broken. Let the sea go back to being only sea. The reply is the same too. A city's pride does not fold, not even for quiet reason. They part with courtesy intact and certainty sharpened. So the plain becomes a school of trial. Lines lean forward and back like tide. Standards dip and rise. The light glances off bronze as if it had found a second sun. In that measured clamor, a challenge is offered to make the day smaller than a war. Champion against champion. The old way that allows the rest of the world to hold still. two men step out, one carrying the memory of a house wronged, the other carrying a God's promise, like a coin that has warmed his palm too long. They meet where the grass is crushed to a darker green. Blows are traded with the economy of craftsmen. A hand closes on a crest, a knee finds purchase. A blade tests the seam where leather yields. For a long breath, justice seems to have found its path. Then the air itself shifts, mist like a lifted veil, a shape that is not wind in the corner of the eye. And the duel ends without verdict, spirited away by a favor that cannot be argued with. A truce holds for a handful of heartbeats. Somewhere a bow sings one impatient note, and the plain remembers war. Time does what it always does in sieges. It lengthens and thins until the hours can be seen through. Rings of campfires at night, rings of dust at noon. The army learns the names of the nearest streams and fig groves, the way reeds move before a wind that will trouble the anchorage, the exact count of strides between a ship's stern and a sentry's post. Raids move out along the coast like pulses, small, fast storms that leave their weather behind. Towns with names soft as water yield storehouses, bronze, bright fabrics whose colors seem too gentle for this work. From one such place, a pair of high-born captives enter the tents like complicated blessings. Gratitude and grievance are both written on their faces, and the camp's fragile balance tilts toward the men who claim them. Within Troy, life collects itself around tasks that respect dignity. A queen walks the high streets and makes the air feel cooler. A prince, helm under his arm, kisses a threshold before taking the steps down to the courtyard. In a chamber that faces east, a loom clicks, and the pattern on it is recognizable to anyone who has watched a day begin and end. Ships like black leaves, men like bright nails in the sun, the long line of a wall that holds. On the ramparts, elders lean on their staves and call the enemy by name without malice, as one recognizes weather. Seasons cycle. Spring throws green up through the wrecked turf. Summer lays its hand flat and hot across the plain. Autumn runs a thumb along grape rows in the rear lands and turns water colder. Winter obliges men to learn the work of fire. The army builds a better skin. The ditch deepened, the palisade braced, stones stacked into altars that smoke in steady columns, so the gods cannot claim hunger as an excuse. Messengers slip between tents and ships with the unshowy speed of habit. Orders are spoken once and then again, slower, so the words can take root before the feet do. Cleverness, too, has its ledger. The same mind that can find the right wind is also capable of envy when a second mind brings order with a cleaner hand. One day a bright head is bowed forever under a weight that looks like justice and smells of something else. The camp loses a builder of games and measures. Somewhere a rival sleeps more deeply, and not only because the day was long. Another day, years from this one, a bow singing on a desolate island will be remembered as missing from this chorus. For now, the chorus carries on, one instrument, shy and determined to make the music without it. Allies tighten along Troy's side like a second belt, names from the riverlands, riders out of the dawn-lit east, captains whose shields carry devices not seen on this shore before. A brother with summer in his stride becomes the city's answer to the sea's relentless questions. His voice is a warm command. His hands are busy with straps and map stones, not with speeches. He looks once across the plain at a lord in a striped cloak, whose thoughts are ladders, and nods as if to say, "We will understand one another by the angle of our work." On a day when the heat lies low like a cat, an old man in a salt-stiff cloak crosses into the camp with dignity for armor. His hands lift open in the ritual that makes strangers kin, a plea wrapped in right, a ransom weighed in gold and in the older coin of respect. He asks for something simple that should be simpler still. The answer he receives is iron, and it is placed in his hands. He turns away without lowering his head. That night, he stands apart from any fire and addresses the dark above the dunes by a name that has answered before. Somewhere invisible, a bow is lifted that does not need fingers to draw it. Morning brings a new sound to the shore, thin at first, like insects in heat, then thicker, insistent. Men cough. Skin shines with the wrong kind of light. The finest horses stand with heads low, breath stringing in white ropes from their nostrils. A god's attention can be measured by the steadiness of harm. Tents are opened to air. Water jars are moved and blessed and moved again. Offerings smoke without pleasure. In assembly, voices try not to rise. The seer speaks and will not soften what he says. A leader hears himself named as the hinge on which the balance might be set right, and feels the word like a stone in the hand. So the shore that learned patience now learns a more dangerous craft. Anger disciplined into phrases, pride convinced to unclench for an hour. The men crowd close around the speaking place and feel the air tilt. One voice, clear as cold water, says what others fear to shape. Another voice, wrapped in authority and the need to keep it, answers in a language edged with command. The plain itself seems to lean in. The sea forgets itself and holds still. Between those two notes lies the silence that decides many things. A hand closes on a strap. Another hand opens and lets a prize become a person again. Oaths flex, duties bristle. The old bonds of respect show their knots and their frayed ends. A single sentence leaves a mouth that has rarely spoken without being obeyed. In answer, a man who has rarely been denied lifts his eyes toward a horizon only he seems to see, and, for the first time since the fleet touched this shore, takes his strength and sets it aside. The beach remembers the absence at once. Camp noises thin. Watchfires look farther away. A tent flap that was always half open has been tied closed. At the trench's lip, men glance toward a squad of myrmidons whose black, patient armor gleams in the sun, and find those helms turned inward, toward their own commander's quiet. The plain grows larger by the space one warrior leaves. Evening falls evenly along both brightnesses, the ring of lamps on the rampart, the ring of fires at the shore. Crickets resume their counting. The river keeps its shoulder under the land and moves toward the sea, as if nothing essential has shifted. In one camp, a captain cleans a blade already clean. In another, a brother with summer for a stride tightens a strap and looks toward the ships with new calculation in his face. The gods do not cheer. They adjust their chairs in the shade and attend more closely. Sleep comes because it must. In that hush, the oar's old rhythm returns in memory, and the sea, which has heard everything, breathes as if to calm both sides at once. Tomorrow will carry harder voices and a field drawn tighter. Tonight, the wind finds the same path through rigging it has always found, and the stars remember their places, and the story lies down. In armor, yes, but with the mind softened by repetition, ready to rise again when the light allows. Dawn unrolls itself across the beach in pale linen, a slow light that touches mast and rope, bronze and wet sand. The camp wakes, but a space has opened in its rhythm, the place where a certain stride, a certain brightness of armor, used to move among the ships. Word travels on the soft paths between tents. He remains apart. The sea lifts its shoulder and sets it down again, indifferent. Men tighten straps, check edges, draw water, speak in quieter tones. Across the plain, the city stirs with an answering purpose. Standards breathe on the walls. At the gate, a prince with summer thunder in his posture draws on a helm and lets his voice go out like a steady wind along wheat. Lines form, not hurried, not careless. Shields joining, spears making a new horizon. Above them, a single bird crosses from left to right, and the watching minds mark it. Omens are not commands, but they sharpen attention. The day begins with courtesy and ends with iron. Arrows test the bright air, a thin rain that rustles without finding much to claim. Then, the ground itself seems to lean forward, and the two brightnesses, beach and wall, send their intention toward the center. Names are called. Replies come like hammered notes. Without the one they used to dress their courage around, the shore-born army discovers a different way to stand. By practice, by habit, by the memory of drills conducted at dawn when the sand held a firmness the heart could trust. Champions step out because stories still prefer tight focus before a wide lens. A duel draws a circle in the dust. It promises to make the day smaller than a war. It does not keep that promise. A god's unseen attention quirks the scale, and the combat ends in a confusion too neat to be chance. Murmurs travel. Lines close again like a wound remembering its shape. The plain resumes its long argument. A storm of effort builds and breaks and builds again. In its heart, a captain with clear eyes, Diomedes, moves with a steadiness that looks like thought made visible. You can trace his progress by the way fear loosens around him. by the way his spear seems to find not flesh so much as opportunity. Across from him, the city sends out weight to meet weight, allies from riverlands and uplands, devices on shields not yet seen on this shore, experienced hands bringing new tempos into the clash. The light climbs, the heat thickens, the dust takes on the taste of metal. By afternoon, both sides know what the day requires. A wall where there was only a line. The army at the ships throws up a skin for itself. Ditch and rampart, stakes driven in with the assurance of men who have built shelters against weather, and now build one against fate. Stones are hauled, timbers wedged, a gate framed where wagons and litters can pass. Altars are set inside this new rib cage, and smoke begins to rise. Quiet, regular, a thread of conversation with the sky. No one pretends this is permanent. No one doubts it is necessary. Inside Troy, the women who keep the city's dignity moving, water vessels lifted, looms set and tended, bread sent to ovens whose heat knows everyone's name. Work in a rhythm that keeps the air human. A queen walks the upper streets, and the sun seems to draw back a pace out of respect. Elders take the wind on the towers and look out with the frankness of old men who have learned to greet danger by its first name. In a shaded court, a guest who is no longer a guest looks toward the sea and does not meet anyone's eyes. As the sun slants, the pressure shifts. The shore-borne army feels the day's weight stack higher than habit can carry, and the fine threads that hold command to obedience begin to hum. Ranks waver, reform, then waver again. A seer's old sentence returns with a new edge. Balance has been bent by one man's decision, and many must bear the angle. The leader of leaders stands in the speaking place and finds his words suddenly heavier than the air will hold. He sends for those who can move what he cannot. Night brings a measured hush and 3 figures to a tent whose doorway faces the sea. They carry courtesy like a lamp. Wine in a bowl, gifts folded into respectful phrases, memories of shared storms invoked in low, even tones. They ask not for fealty, but for the righted keel of a common cause. Return, not as servant, but as the weight that keeps the ships from sliding back into the water by themselves. They say the words men say when they need a door to be a door again. Inside, the absent one sits with a lyre across his knees, fingers finding a calm that battle cannot supply. He listens as a craftsman listens to advice from other craftsmen, without mockery, without haste, with each word weighed for what it can hold. He answers with a shape that refuses to bend. Honor named, injury named, a future imagined that does not end on these sands. He offers friendship and protection to those closest to him. He withholds the one currency the camp cannot counterfeit. The messengers leave as they came, lamplight on faces made older by refusal. Outside, the sea breathes. In the dark, a myrmidon tent crest shines and does not move. The city's camp on the plain blooms with 1,000 fires. From the beach it looks like a low sky fallen to earth. Men talk softly, mend straps, share bread, tighten laces, lay down with weapons where a hand can find them without thought. On the towers, watchers trade the names of constellations as if reciting a litany of old debts and old kindnesses. A prince makes a slow circuit, his presence smoothing argument, correcting excess, reminding everyone that tomorrow has its own appetite and will need to be fed. Beyond sight, a higher balance tilts. A god whose seat is often a cloud keeps his promise to the city for this portion of the story and allows the plain to favor one side. The proof arrives in small economy. The wind that carries a shout farther than it should. The sudden weight in an enemy shield at the wrong instant. A thought that comes one heartbeat late to a hand that needed it one heartbeat earlier. Mortals will call this luck. The immortals know it by a different name. Morning returns with a new flavor to the air, salt and iron, and a sense of being watched closely by things without faces. The city steps down from its gates in full weight. Horsehair crests nodding, bronze shining, spears like a second crop on the field. The shore-borne army meets them with its best answer. The wall, the ditch, the palisade, the calm voice at the gate, saying who goes where and why. At first it holds. The ditch confuses, the stakes punish. The rampart receives blows with the slightly surprised patience of new work that was made well. But pressure is cumulative. Where the ditch narrows, where the palisade leans, where the gate must open and close for breath and movement, the city finds purchase. A stone hurled just so becomes a story. A spear thrown blind into a gap becomes a wedge. A chariot's wheel finds the one patch of ground hard enough to bite, and lifts into a leap that will be told differently by those who saw it, and those who only wanted to. From the beach, you can hear the bolts sink into the gate's wood, the ropes straining, the winches groaning like animals who have worked all day and will work all night. You can hear the deeper silence that follows when a section of parapet empties, because those on it have been summoned to the gap. You can hear one voice that used to be the camp's spine not sounding where it would have sounded, and the absence rings. A dust-colored god of the sea lifts his head now and again, and lends a large, cool hand without announcing himself. The wall stiffens. The line finds its hinge and holds. A prince on the attacker's side understands the movement and presses where the old riverbed makes a natural throat. His spear finds laces, not flesh. His words set rhythm more than they set fire. He is the city's patience made visible and urgent. Afternoon sharpens, then softens into gold. The air grows thick with the day's work. A sudden stillness moves across both brightnesses, wall and beach, as if a veil had been drawn for one breath. Then the world resumes with two new notes. Smoke curving from a single ship's rail, where an arrow, obedient to an idea older than both armies, has landed in tar, and the low thunder of feet as men pivot by hundreds to address the place where flame has decided to practice being a mouth. Buckets run in chains, leather sloshes, curses are swallowed and kept in the stomach to be turned into strength. The ditch that was meant to keep the enemy out keeps water in. Hands learn new routes to pass it forward. Above, the city's men press harder, hearts rising at the sight of brand on wood. Below, the shore-borne army remembers that the ships are the only home they have on this side of the sea, and home teaches hands to move faster than fear. Evening leans in. The fire is smothered to a sulking glow. Not yet a memory, not yet a victory. The wall stands with fresh scars that can be traced by lamplight. The gate breathes slower. The camp exhales all at once and inhales again as if to store enough air for night. The sea lays its old rhythm against the sand and makes a promise it always keeps. I will be here when you wake, under a moon the color of hammered tin. The messengers who failed return to their tents and set down bowls untouched. The lyre in the quiet shelter by the farthest ships speaks once and then is silent. On the plain, the city's fires burn with the brightness of confidence and the carefulness of those who do not mistake a good day for the end of a task. On the towers, helmets rest on stones, and the men beneath them look up and let the chill on their faces carry thought away. Sleep comes because bodies insist. It comes in slices and does not reach the bottom of the well, but it does enough. Within it, the memory of oars lifting and falling smooths the mind. The pattern of drills returns to lay order on breath. The voices of leaders become lower and more measured, until they are only lines across a map in a hand that does not tremble. Tomorrow will ask for more than today asked. The story knows it. For now, the sand cools, the ropes ease, the stars keep their exact accounts. Morning returns with a pale rinsed light, and the camp breathes as one. Ropes eased, straps checked, water passed hand to hand. The scar of last night's flame glows dull along a ship's rail, tar sealed over, wood cooling, men moving with that careful speed learned on days when the world might turn. The wall stands with fresh bruises. The gate inhales and exhales. The sea keeps its old, calming rhythm. Across the plain, standards lift from Troy's gates like leaves turning toward sun. The prince, with summer thunder in his stride, arranges lines by tone rather than noise. Spears a new horizon, crests nodding, chariots set where the ground is truest. Between brightnesses, beach and wall, the air feels watched by more than eyes. A quiet oath passes along both fronts. Steady, steady. Without the one whose absence has become a space in the day, the shore-borne army leans into method. Names are called, answers come low and exact. The ditch confuses, the palisade punishes, the rampart receives. Yet pressure has a way of finding seams. By noon, you can hear the wall learning how to endure, winches singing, stakes complaining, the gate breathing faster than anyone wants to admit. In a tent near the furthest ships, a friend steps through the hush and sits where the lyre's last note is still hanging in the air. He speaks without ornament, all marrow and plea. Lend me the light you will not carry. Let me be the hinge while you remain the door. Outside, the surf counts time. Inside, pride listens and yields a measured inch. Armor gleams where it has hung too quietly. A hand rests on a shoulder with the weight of years. Instruction follows, cool and exact. Drive them from the hulls, break their relish, then come back. Do not chase brightness into shadow. The myrmidons answer as one body waking. Crests dark as wet stone line up. Shields kiss rim to rim. A hush falls dense and expectant, like the air before rain. When the gate opens for them, it is as if a held breath leaves the chest of the entire shore. They step into light that turns bronze to mild fire, into dust that tastes faintly of iron and time. The friend shines with borrowed heat and does not look back. The plane tilts. Where flame had tried to learn a ship's name, water now runs in bucket chains without panic. Where the ditch grew teeth, boots find the firm edge and use it. The myrmidons move like a thought that has finally found its words, clean, unhesitating, exact. Lines that had swelled with confidence find themselves walking backward, then bracing, then breathing hard and counting. In the press of that reversal, two fates collide in a calm that sounds like inevitability. A king from far rivers, lion on his shield, courage simple as bread, meets the friend in the open, where dust turns the sun to brass. They trade the pure currency of skill, stance, balance, the arithmetic of reach. The blow that ends it is not cruel, it is true. The earth receives the fallen with the old tenderness it keeps for all who lie down on it after long work. Far above, power pauses, grieves without changing the law that was spoken at the start. The wave rolls on. Chariots wheel, then peel away. Helmets turn toward the gates with the stiff angle of minds recalculating. Along the ramparts, hands that had lifted in certainty lower to adjust straps. The friend moves as if momentum itself were a road, driving the plane clear, calling men by their courage and returning it to them. A name gathers around him like breeze around a flame. The nearness of victory is a bright, thinning edge. It asks for more than was promised. A presence in the heat, felt, not seen, lays a warning hand between shoulder blades and takes a measure of breath away. Another hand, mortal and precise, finds its chance where bronze laces leather. A spear arrives from the side like a sentence finished by someone who has waited too long to speak. The friend goes to one knee in dust that smells of crushed grass and warm metal. Words leave his mouth shaped like instruction and loyalty, not complaint. The borrowed light loosens and lies down. The plane absorbs this new absence like a bell taking sound. Confidence from the walls surges. The shore-borne line stiffens as if waking from a dream. In dark armor by the still ships, a quiet closes on itself. A circle drawn tighter than before. News runs with its head low. In a tent that has held music more than anger, hands rise and then fall to the knees as if weight had suddenly multiplied. Grief stands up without asking permission. The sea, unable to stop breathing, tries to soften its own voice. From salt water a figure rises, whose counsel is older than any harbor. Fingers comb through hair bright as hammered metal, and find a pulse that is pain and iron in one. The promise spoken there is not dramatic. It is exact. Stand, and I will bring you the means to stand. Far away, a forge that remembers stars begins to glow. Bellows whispering, coals whitening, a god of craft letting sparks swarm like fireflies in a summer orchard. Shapes take breath where there is no breath. A shield that holds a world's small motions. Greaves that remember rivers. A cuirass with light asleep in its curves. A helm crowned in work that needed no witness. On the plain, evening, lays a cool hand on hot dust. Torches mark lines without boasting. The city's fires shine with relief, edged in caution. The beach's fires burn low and inward, hands cupped close, voices slowed to the cadence of vows repeated until they sound like weather. Near the furthest ships, a body is washed with care that argues against finality. Names are spoken the way prayers are spoken, to make the mouth know what the heart is not ready to learn. Night travels on quiet feet. The wind threads rigging with old music. The rampart, scarred and stubborn, looks almost gentle by lamplight. In a chamber of Troy, armor is set down with a sigh of straps. A commander rubs his brow and studies the dark as if it were a map. On the beach, a circle of black-crested warriors sits without talking, heads bowed, hands folded over spears laid across the knees. In the space between their silence and the surf's patient counting, a new note arrives, faint at first, then sure. The soft ring of metal tested and approved, the breath of a forge dying satisfied. Before dawn, the sea brightens along its rim. A shape waits where music has been, wrapped now in work no hand on earth could refuse to admire. The morning smells of salt and cooled iron. A voice that has been quiet too long lifts, not loud, but adamant. It asks only for a single thing, and asks it of everything. A path straight enough to carry wrath without waste. The camp does not cheer. It steadies. The city behind its walls feels the air change key. A prince cinches his straps and draws breath as if tasting a storm far offshore. Standards lift. Gates consider their duty. The plain lies between brightnesses like a page turned to a fresh line. Sleep, if you can. With the surf counting and the forge light faded, with grief cooling into purpose, and purpose fitting itself with new light. The next step has already set its foot down. The story lowers its voice and gathers strength. Dawn comes silver and salt-scented. The surf counts softly while a new brightness waits by the furthest ships. Armor that seems to remember starlight. Bronze hums when touched. A shield holds small worlds in its round. Fields in harvest, dancers in a circle. A city at feast and a city at watch. Constellations laid like quiet coins. Straps are drawn, greaves kissed to shins. The helm settles, and the camp feels the temperature change. When he stands, the air itself tightens its grip. The assembly meets in measured calm. Gifts are set out, oaths spoken cleanly. Offense named and acknowledged so it can be buried under duty. No flourish, only the return to alignment. Bread is offered. He refuses it. A clear-eyed goddess lends strength the way a hand steadies a cup. The myrmidons form, black-crested and inwardly bright. Their silence accord the whole beach can hear. Horses stamp at the chariot bar. A plumed head bends to speak, and the traces tremble as if they understood. Go straight, come back. The road is short, the work exact. They move, and dust rises as if eager to be part of this hour. The first collision is not loud. It is final. Lines that press the ships yesterday feel the ground slide under them, step by step, as though the plane itself has decided its slope. Names break like foam on a rock and vanish. He does not linger where victory has already been named. He keeps to the narrow instruction set before dawn. Drive them from the hulls, erase the appetite that fire learned. Return to the line when the work is properly done. The camp breathes for the first time in a day. Opposite him, weight gathers to meet weight. A son of the river, big as a gate and simple in courage, squares himself in the open. They measure with eyes, then with bronze, the honest arithmetic of reach, balance, timing. When the answer arrives, the ground takes it gently. The victor does not boast. The plane does that for him, clearing space as he passes, appetite quieted where his shadow falls. Gods look down and keep their faces still. Another prince steps forward because pride and duty bind in the same rope. His lineage is long. His future has other coasts written in it. A sea god sees that future, and without drama lifts him out of the hour and sets him back in it alive. It feels like a breath caught and let go. Beside them, alliances knot themselves tighter. Riverland shields, dawn-lit riders, captains with devices new to these gates, each tested, each made to yield. The river itself begins to think. Along Scamander's bends, the water takes on a voice, not thunder, but insistence, as bodies and broken gear choke its easy curves. Bronze flashes under the surface like small, angry suns. He wades, and the current leans on him. He strides, and the current climbs. Banks collapse in slabs. Reeds vanish under brown rush. The river swells with a will of its own, curls around his knees, his waist, his ribs, eager to learn what weight breath has. Stones roll, mud grips. He turns and fights water the way he fought men, by angle and refusal. Above, promise smooth. A queen of air lifts her hand toward a forge's steward, and heat comes down in a wide, disciplined breath. Grass crackles, driftwood sighs. The river hisses its anger and steps back, not defeated, but out-argued. Steam ghosts the banks. The plain shines in patches where fire has licked it smooth. Across the sky, old grudges take a brief walk, helm to helm, veil to strap. Gods trading gestures more than wounds, while the Father on the height sits large and thoughtful, and lets the picture continue. Pressed hard, the city folds toward its stones. Chariots find the safer ground and wheel for the gates. Runners lift knees high through the rutted field. Standards duck and reappear like swimming birds. Along the ramparts, hands fly on ropes and winches. Doors think about closing. He does not spend himself on timber. He hunts the thought that led the morning against his ships, and the thought has a name. It is not the guest with smooth speeches. It is the captain whose presence has been summer for a year of days. For a hanging hour, they do not meet. Apollo blurs one edge of the chase, holding a likeness in the open while the real weight slips through a side street and breathes in shadow. 3 times the ruse works, thin as gauze and just as effective. 3 times the hunter shakes it off like water and takes up the scent again. The city saves itself by cleverness. The plain grows quiet where the cleverness is not. By late light, the army at the beach has become a wall of faces that no longer look over their shoulders at flame. Buckets hang empty, then swing idle. Oars rest easy in their leather cradles. The ramparts' new scars look old already. On the plain between brightnesses, the space narrows to a single line of intent. From the shining helm that does not bend to the single figure that does not step inside the gate. He stands there, spear grounded, strap tightened, head turned half toward the wall and half toward the open, knowing exactly what it means to stay. Voices from the stone call him inward. The bronze before him calls him forward. He chooses the ground because some choices arrive wearing only one face. The wind lifts the horsehair on both helms. Distance collapses to the length of a breath and the weight of a look. Night crouches at the edges, but the world has one more act of stillness to hold. Torches draw a ring that keeps both armies just outside of it. The river, newly quieted, carries starlight like filings in dark glass. On the beach, a circle of black-crested men sit with spears across their knees, listening to the surf say the same calm word over and over. In the city, a hand rests on stone until the imprint of warmth fades. Between those two hushes, wrath cools into purpose, and purpose sharpens into promise. The work behind has been done. The work ahead fits in the width of a doorway. The next breath belongs to two names alone. Torches draw a low circle on the plain, and inside it the air holds still. Two figures face each other between brightnesses, the wall and the beach, bronze breathing faintly in the cool. One stands with the city at his back, spear grounded, strap firm. The other advances in work that remembers fire, a moving constellation. Wind lifts the horsehair on both helms and then forgets to move at all. He turns once, twice, thrice along the curve of stone, feet whispering on dust, the wall pacing him with shadow. Behind him, voices call from the gates. Ahead of him, the bright shape never loses patience. The world narrows to breath and footing, to the sound a spear point makes when it kisses a stone by accident. Above, a scale tilts in a god's quiet hand. Below, resolve completes its circle and decides to stop running. A friendly face glimmers at the edge of sight, promise of a second spear, a shoulder at the moment of weight. He believes because belief is a kind of courage. The throw is true, the bronze sings, the shaft quivers in a shield that will not admit more than it must. He reaches for the help he was offered and finds only air. The lesson of gods delivered with impeccable courtesy. In that instant he straightens, as men do when they decide to meet the thing in front of them with nothing left to barter. Words pass between them that the dust keeps. Praise without softness. Terms without malice. The simple asking that a body find its way home. The answer is iron. They close. Bronze rings a short, exact sentence on bronze. Leather breathes, sand shifts. Then the bright decision arrives, the one that was always walking toward this hour, and the plain accepts what it is given. The earth is gentle, as it always is with those who have worked it well. The walls cry out, a sound that climbs stone and goes on into sky. A veil falls, hands reach for parapets, and cannot find enough grip to change what has already been written. The gates inhale and fail to exhale. On the beach, a line of black crests pauses, as if a wind had passed through their roots. The sea keeps breathing, because that is what the sea does, carrying grief on its back without sinking. In the bright armor, wrath does not spend itself. It hardens. He speaks to the fallen as if reason could be compelled to answer, as if loss could be paid back in the same coin it used to buy the day before. The chariot waits. Straps are tied with competent hands. Dust lifts as the wheels turn. A long mark writes itself along the curve of the plain. The city watches with eyes held open by will alone, while the ring closes and closes again. The gods do not thunder. They let the picture stand, and the picture teaches. Night slips down. Fires bloom along the beach, a slow necklace of red bowls. Along the wall, a matching constellation tilts and wavers. In a quiet space near the furthest ships, the friend is laid out with a care that argues against the world's arithmetic. Oil, cloth, a name spoken as if names could be warmed and held. The new-made armor glows dimly, remembering the forge. The shield's small worlds breathe under lamplight. The dancers, the harvest, the city at feast, untouched by this hour, and yet belonging to it. He sits by the surf and lets the sea speak. Salt touches bronze, foam threads his ankles. The horizon is a dark lid with a single bright hinge. Sleep does not come, then comes in a thin slice, and within it a voice, as familiar as his own breath, stands beside him. Bury me. Let me go where the quiet is true. Do not let anger make you forget the rites. He wakes with the tide halfway in, and the stars rearranged by a hand that loves order. In Troy, lamps are set down because fingers tremble. Water jars clink and are steadied. A queen walks the length of a room and stands without moving, learning the shape of this new silence. A brother leans his forehead against stone that still holds the day's heat and vows nothing aloud. Far above the roofs, a god looks down and feels the balance lean too far. Another murmurs that grief must be given limits, or it ceases to be grief and becomes something else. Before dawn, the chariot makes its slow circuit again, and the city's voices fail, then return in a lower key. On the beach, wood is brought, stacked, blessed, straight trunks, resinous boughs, planks that once knew the lines of a hull, honeyed oil, black wool, a long platform built with a carpenter's love of right angles. The air smells of pine and smoke, not yet lit, of sea salt and oiled leather, of bread broken and passed to hands that forgot to be hungry. The assembly gathers without noise. Names are called and answered. Gifts are laid in a row. Hair cut and braided, amphora with seals unbroken, bronze that came too late to the fight offered to the journey instead. He stands with the new light upon him, eyes steady, voice level. He promises what must be promised: fire, honor, rest. He does not promise what cannot be kept, that the world will tilt back to its old angle, that a day like the last will never come again. The city watches across the plain and learns the same lesson at a different fire. A prince is mourned with hands clenched and then opened, with salt on the tongue and dust on the brow, with garments torn carefully so that they can be mended later. Stones on the rampart remember his weight. A spear leans in a corner and is not touched. Between wall and beach, the air holds a hush that respects both sorrows without choosing between them. Toward evening, the river carries a new scent, smoke with honey in it, cedar and something older. Flares rise and fall. The wind shifts and brings a tone from the beach that sounds like praise without triumph. Over the city, a quiet spreads under the eaves, the kind that precedes decisions. On Olympus, restraint is agreed upon with the lift of an eyebrow, the tilt of a cup. Soon, someone must go down and say enough. When the stars return, The plain is a dark skin pricked with embers. The surf keeps count, a patient scribe. In the Myrmidon circle, spears lie across knees, points turned earthward, sleep taking men in degrees. Beside the pyre not yet lit, armor waits like a vow waiting for its hour to speak. On the wall, a watcher names the constellations and stumbles once over a name he has never stumbled over. He says it again, careful, and the sky answers by holding still. This is the hinge in the tale, the hour when anger, having done what it could, is asked to make room for right. The next day will lay fire to wood and smoke to heaven. Games will follow to teach hands how to lift joy without guilt. A road will open for a king who comes in humility to ask for what he lost. For now, the world breathes slowly, evenly, like a chest that has wept and found its rhythm again. The gates breathe. The ships creak softly in their cradles. The sea keeps its word. And somewhere between wall and beach, a vow softens into something steadier than wrath and harder than grief. To honor, to finish, to set down what must be set down, and then to listen for the next right thing. Dawn comes thin and colorless along the surf. The pyre grows where the sand holds firm, straight trunks laid with a carpenter's love of right angles, resinous boughs crisscrossed, planks from a broken skiff turned to purpose. Oil gleams in broad-jawed jars. Black wool waits, folded. Amphorae stand like sentries sealed against the morning. Names are spoken once and answered. The circle closes without flourish. He steps forward in armor that remembers fire and lays his hand on the bier. Words leave him clean and level. Honor, repayment, rest. Hair is cut and braided. Gifts are set in a row. Bright iron that came too late to bite. A cup, a cloak, small tokens that knew another life. When the torch finds its work, the wind at first refuses to stir. Then a messenger of the high places fetches breath from the cold quarters of the world. Flames rise in tears, orange, then white at the heart, wood sighing, oil blooming, smoke climbing in a dark, solemn ribbon toward the shore's pale roof. Through the long hour the circle holds. Ash settles on bronze and lashes. The scent is cedar and honey and salt. When the coals bed down into a red field, bones are lifted with gloved care, washed with wine, sealed in a golden jar, wrapped in fat cloth. A low mound is raised. A stone is set, not for forgetting, but so that memory has a place to sit and look at the sea. Grief needs hands. Games give them work. Ground is marked. Prizes set out beneath the sun. Women's sashes stitched in bright thread. Tripods that promise steam. Iron that will outlast this year. A horse haltered in quiet strength. A bowl chased with ivy leaves. The chariot race goes first. Drivers wheel their teams until the sand remembers circles, then face the straight. Whips crack, wheels bite, foam climbs the collars. The turnstone leans its silent instruction into each mind. A favorite flies too close to chance and learns the angle's cost. Splinter, cry, dust. The victor does not crow. He breathes, accepts the reins back into his palm. The arbiter is generous. First to skill, then to ruin endured. Prizes parceled with a justice that feels like balm poured on hot metal. A dispute rises and fades under the weight of a young man's apology and an older man's patience. Boxing follows. Two thunderheads made of flesh, leather thongs darkening. The larger voice boasts. The smaller knows what his hands can do. Blows land with the sound of doors closed in storm. One falls, and the ground receives him. Wrestling coils into a knot and refuses to release. Two wrestlers sweat the same salt until honor can be divided no further, and the judge pulls them apart alive and equal. The foot race skims like a whetted blade, one runner light, one lighter still. And somewhere in the swirl a goddess places a small nudge on an ankle and calls it encouragement. The archers string their calm. Shafts go out with long vowels and find a tethered dove's cord, not the bird itself. Mercy practiced in public. A spear throw closes the tally, clean arc, neat thud. In each event, the hand that gives prizes gives more than objects. It returns measure to men who have lived too long by extremes. Across the plain, the city keeps its own rights. Black cloth torn carefully so it can be mended later. Dust on brow and head. Water drawn and poured in patterns that outlast tempers. On the ramparts, watchers learn the quiet of a day without assault, the way banners breathe, the way mortar shows hairline cracks a clever palm can read. In shaded rooms, food is set out and not tasted. Lamps are trimmed lower because light grows sharp when hearts are raw. The body that should have withered under rage does not. Each morning, a chariot circles the wall, straps taut, dust rising in slow sorrow. Each morning, flesh returns to its likeness by hands not seen. Ambrosia in the wounds, soft cloud against the sun. The lesson is plain to those who watch from above. Grief must be fenced. It is not allowed to become a season. Night lays a blue lid over the beach. The games end. Laughter thin as thread and honest. Quarrels concluded with open hands. Prizes carried away like small pieces of weather. In a tent that faces the sea, he sits with bread and remembers to eat. The surf keeps counting. Sleep arrives and yields a dream that asks again for what was promised. Right finished, earth given. Anger turned to guard rather than blade. He wakes steady. Far from the ships, an old king in a high house hears that the torch has been set, that the circle held, that the chariot still moves in dust. He orders a wagon loaded until its axles speak in low complaints. Bright cloaks, hammered tripods, raw gold, work of patient hands. He sets aside dignity without throwing it away, and steps into night. A god who favors travelers and oaths meets him on the edge of the plain, in the shape of a quick youth with clear eyes, and all the doors along the shore forget to remember they are doors. They pass sentries who do not stir, ropes that do not creak, dogs that decide the wind has no scent. The god's staff draws a line through danger and makes it sleep. The tent they seek breathes lamplight and the smell of quenched iron. Inside, armor leans. A cup sweats on a low table, and the man who wears both name and weight sits with his hands loose, the forge's work gone quiet on his shoulders. No herald speaks. The old king goes down on his knees and reaches for the hands that burned his house last night, and may yet burn it tomorrow. He kisses the same fingers that tied the straps to drag his loss, and finds in the gesture a passage, the way a key fits a lock not made for it but pleased to be used. Words come low and exact, built from truthful things, the price of a life measured in treasure, the knowledge that treasure is poor coin, the memory of fathers, the ache that looks the same in winning and losing. Two men weep together without shame and remember they are not made of bronze. The bargain is clean. Gold for a body, time for a right. Safe road of days between brightnesses, wall and beach, so that fires can be built without fear sniffing at their edges. Servants bring water. Women who know the work bathe what must be bathed. Linen is laid smooth. Oils add their quiet sheen. Armor that once sang is set aside. The face is made like itself again. A meal follows. Bread, meat sliced without waste. A cup filled and passed. They speak of neutral things, the way wood splits best. A star used for steering. How winter smells in different harbors, because words also need rest. At first light, a young guide with a trickster's smile leads the wagon back the way it came. The camp wakes, and, seeing what it sees, looks down. No spear points follow. No boasts accompany. Along the wall, a murmur builds and then steadies. Gates yawn, then open fully. The city receives its own. Lamentation rises, not keen and tearing, but heavy and long like rain that was owed. Cloth is torn, then folded. A bed is made of cedar and care. 9 days are counted out, or 11, or the exact number needed for sorrow to put on its formal clothes. Wood is stacked, oil is poured, coins are placed where tradition places them. Stone prepares to learn a new name. On the beach, the mound newly raised faces the mound to be. Between them, the plain lies quiet for the agreed span. Men mend gear with less haste. Cooks linger over pots and learn again the proper pinch of salt. Someone strings a lyre and plays not triumph but continuity. The wall breathes. The ships breathe. The river carries away ash, old and new. In high places, The ones who rule weather and rumor nod at a balance briefly restored. Wrath has been narrowed to a blade that cuts only what it must. Pity has been permitted to walk the field in daylight. No one mistakes this pause for peace. It is a hinge. Beyond it wait new names, new engines, a hollow shape with room for men to stand inside its ribs and hold their breath. For the moment, rites are finished as they should be, and the story sits straighter on its stool, ready for the next hard page. Dawn comes back to the plain with a thin copper edge, smoke from 2 mounds drifting level before it climbs. The truce has been kept, the rites completed. Now the air thickens again with purpose. The measured clatter of harness, the hush before horns. From the riverside dust a new thunder answers Troy's call. Riders bright with fresh bronze, crescent shields, long spears balanced like thoughts held steady. At their head, a queen sits high and straight, eyes narrowed to a calm that does not ask permission. Her name rides ahead of her, Penthesilea, and the city's gates open to it, as to rain in a dry month. Across the beach, armor that remembers fire is lifted from its rack and fitted piece by piece. Straps drawn, greaves sealed, helm set, no flourish, only alignment. The myrmidons fall in behind like a shadow made of iron. When the 2 bright centers meet in the open, the plain holds its breath. She moves with the long rhythm of a river horse. Clean arcs, sudden weight. He answers without waste, a blade that knows exactly what it's for. The circle they draw is narrow and exact, bronze speaking small, sure sentences. When the ending arrives, it is simple and final. He stands. She lies in a curve the earth understands. In the stillness after, a look crosses his face. No one expected. Recognition. Hard and late. He orders, honor done. Wood and flame take her the way they took his friend, not as spoil, but as measure. The day, already hard, hardens further. Evening brings new banners from far sunrises, mail tinted like dawn, plumes the color of first light on water. Their king steps down from a chariot that breathes heat. Memnon, tall and certain, carrying distance in his voice. On the first rush, he scatters men like seed from a winnower's pan. On the second, he finds a heart near the shore and stops it with skill and inevitability. Grief tightens fists. The answer rises like weather. Bronze meets bronze in a quarrel old as mornings. High above, a father of thunder keeps the scale steady long enough for fate to tell the truth it brought. The brighter life burns, the nearer it stands to the wind. The king of first light falls. The horizon seems to widen with his last breath. The day goes on with one fewer promise. The river remembers everything. Scamander swells with gear and bodies, with dust turned to clay and carried toward the sea. He wades in, and the current leans on him like a wrestler grown too bold. He sets himself. The water climbs, angry, full of its own thought. Banks slide. reeds vanish. Overhead a craft god's hot breath pours down at a queen's request, and the flood recoils, hissing into itself. Steam ghosts the bent sedges. The plain gleams in places where fire has licked it smooth. The world resumes, chastened. Toward noon, a small thing, glint and hum, the twang that turns the head, moves through hot air with a purpose too neat for chance. A bowstring sings from shadow. A god of clear distances guides the note with 2 fingers. It finds the one seam that bronze cannot close. The great stride stutters. The shield's little worlds tilt. The body that taught the beach how to breathe goes to its knees. Hands gather him as if gathering a standard fallen in wind. The line behind him stands dumb. The sea keeps breathing because nothing else knows how. The camp becomes a low thunder of grief. Black-crested helms are set down and do not turn. A circle forms around a shape on a board. Oil, cloth, salt. The armor, forged out of stars, is set aside like a crown removed in a dark room. Above the ships, long keening travels on the shore, wind and returns as echo from the city's stone. Under the same sky, 2 houses pay for the same hour in different coin. Silence cannot last. The armor must be given a wearer. The shield must belong to a hand. 2 names stand before an assembly that has forgotten how to choose. One is weight and plain courage, a gate built to hold. The other is ladders and weather sense, a mind that has moved storms where muscles could not. Words are weighed and do not weigh the same. The work of the forge is placed on the speaker of the subtler sentence. Across the sand, a larger shadow withdraws from the light, dignity wrapped around it like a cloak. His night is long and solitary. In the morning, the camp speaks of him, in the past tense, with gentleness and regret, as men do when a good oak has split in silence and laid itself down. Prophecy, ignored at breakfast, sits at supper. A seer says the plain in front of Troy will not change its name until 2 old lacks are mended. The bow that once burned in a hero's hands must sing on this soil, and a sacred image that anchors the city's luck must be moved. So a ship peels away to an island that knows the sound of complaint, and returns with a man whose bitterness curls like smoke, and with a bow that hums when touched the way a nerve hums when it remembers pain. Clean hands dress an old wound. Clean purpose replaces old anger. In the first trial on the plain, the bow chooses its line with indecent ease. A prince who had learned how to let distance do his work turns and sits down in a doorway he will not rise from. The city swallows that knowledge, straightens its back, and pretends the wind has not shifted. Night raids take on a new tenderness for silence. 2 figures move through brick scent and shadow, hands bare, feet soft, breath measured between stones. They find the thing that is not allowed to be found, the small, ancient face that has listened to every promise Troy ever made itself. It is wrapped and lowered, carried across thresholds that forget to cry out, ferried over a ditch that forgets to be deep. When the moon rises on the beach, the image sits among tarps and oars and says nothing, as it always has, while men sit near it and feel, without admitting it, that the ground has become slightly less sure under the city's feet. From the green islands to the south, a kinsman of the fallen is brought, red-haired and direct, bearing the same clarity in action and a different fire in the eyes. He learns the plain in 3 strides and calls nothing by a softer name than it deserves. The first time he meets the city's thunder, he answers with his own, less music, more verdict. The second time he remembers to look for doors while everyone else is watching windows. The third time people begin to say his 2 names in one breath, the given name and the one that means flame. The months turn. Tents change skins. Ropes are new with tar. Stones at the gate wear fresh polish. The ditch gains teeth where it once only confused. In the city, ledgers record grain with tighter figures. Bronze is mended twice before it is replaced. Walls learn the names of the men who lean on them at midnight. Between the brightnesses, beach and rampart, space narrows by neighbors and nights. The plain shrinks for everyone. Cleverness, which has been chewing at its bit for years, lifts its head. A carpenter with patient hands runs a palm along timber and listens to what the wood prefers to be. A captain with ladders in his mind kneels on the sand and draws an oval with his finger, then another inside it, then a mouth. A mason brings pegs. A carver brings augers. Ropes arrive without comment. Pitch simmers in wide, quiet pots. From groves just inland, cedar and fir come down like tall thoughts and are set on frames. The shape that grows on the beach is absurd and solemn at once. Ribs like a chapel, flanks like a promise, a hollow heart that will know breath. It points its head at the city with a courtesy that borders on mockery, and then refuses to move. Rumor crosses the plain as rumor does, fast, embroidered, sure of itself. On the walls, men lean out to see the joke on the shore. In the market, a woman lowers her voice when she names it. In the courts, old men draw little pictures in dust and do not laugh. On the beach, orders travel the rope lines in a new key. What must burn? What must be loaded? Who will sail early and who will be last? Which anchors to lift and which to leave? How to make ashes say, "We are gone," in accents no one can doubt. At twilight, scouts bring word that a gate has learned hesitation, that a quarrel has started among the city's speakers over a wooden thing that makes no sound. In the camp, a lyre is tuned and put away. A cloak is folded twice and then unfolded. A man with cold eyes counts heads and speaks 5 names in a row that will stand inside the work of cedar until their legs forgive them. The rest will trust water, wind, and the city's fatigue. Night lowers its lid. The river talks to itself in little glassy syllables. Out in the roads the ships swing with their anchors, pointing as one body toward a place a few hours distant, where islands break the sea like stepping stones. On the sand, the hollow thing stands finished and patient, smelling of sap and pitch, stars crawling across its curved back as if tasting a new hill. Somewhere in the dark, oars are muffled, sails are reefed, breath is held, a continent of will pivoting quietly toward a door it has not yet seen, and a silence gathering that is stronger than any speech. Morning finds the hollow thing standing where the tide can kiss its toes, cedar ribs lacquered with pitch, a mouth shaped like a secret. The beach is oddly clean. Ashes mark where ships once breathed. Char and rope ends speak a language that says departure. From the walls, faces lean into light. A murmur gathers like bees around a fallen branch. Gift or trap, omen or insult, surrender or bait. A single man appears where the surf frays, hands bound, shoulders raw with salt, a face schooled in helplessness. He names himself abandoned and wronged by those who sailed. He speaks of vows broken among the oars, of a votive built to heal a god's resentment, of a size chosen so no rampart could admit it, if the city were meant to live. His words arrive with the calm of practiced grief, each sentence a step cut neatly into the dune. Near the Scaean gate, a woman whose eyes have always looked farther than anyone wants them to, calls out truth until her voice thins. The wind mislays her warning and returns with only dust. Then a priest of clear-sighted habit strides down with a spear and impulse. Timber rings under iron. The belly answers with a sound that no carpenter would mistake for solid. He raises his arm to strike again, and the sea, mild as glass a breath before, suddenly coils. 2 lengths of living rope rear out of the green and find his body. The cry that begins fails to finish. Foam spreads like linen over a table, then smooths. On the wall, conviction tilts toward acceptance. In the market, a hand reaches for a cart rope and pulls. They rig lines under the flank and over the back, smear rollers with fat, lay their combined will to the cords. The horse moves as if it enjoys being heavy. Gates that were built to refuse everything but air now try on generosity, and the city lets the thing in that will one day be named its fate. Wheels complain, axles whisper, banners lean to watch. The horse settles in the central square as if it had always belonged to thresholds, and thresholds to it. Doors close, torches are lit, wine runs. Songs that have not been sung in 10 years find their voices. Night lays its lid. On the beach, nothing moves that is not wind or reed. Out beyond the first darkness, sails like folded wings tilt toward shore. Oars are wrapped. Hulls cut water quietly, as if afraid to bruise it. Inside the wooden thing, hands cramp, breath is counted. Blades sit in palms like sleeping birds. A signal pricks the sky. Thin star against a field of larger stars, and burns out. Ropes fall into place. A hatch learns how to be a door. Figures spill like shadow onto tiles still warm from festival feet. The square remembers its other work. Helmets bloom in doorways. Cords find fastenings. A latch whispers. A hinge gives up its secret. At the gate, sleeping iron awakens with a groan that seems almost relieved. Beyond the ramparts, the quiet fleet is already inside the harbor, oars lifted to keep them from knocking laughter out of the night. The city rises too slowly for what has begun. Fire takes corners like a fast learner. The bronze that was polished for pride shows another purpose. In a palace where cedar pillars hold light like water, an old king gathers himself at an altar's foot and opens his hands to a god whose statue remembers everything. Fate finds him there, swift, respectful, exact, and completes its sentence. Elsewhere, Osiris grips a lintel and watches prophecy arrive on time, and without apology. A queen breaks and holds. A captain with summer in his stride spends his last strength where the wall meets the court and makes that meeting costly. Not all doors open to flame. In a narrow street, a man who has carried duty like a steady flame lifts the small gods of his house from their shelf and wraps them in cloth that once smelled of feast. Companions gather. A slope behind the city that faces west learns their quiet footprints. The plain beyond the river receives another story and hides it in its long grass. By moonfall, the horse stands alone and content in the square it conquered by patience. From its shadow, a messenger runs up a stair and plants a spear on a parapet that now belongs to someone else. Smoke rises in columns that turn the stars to dull coins. The river, faithful to the end, carries reflections of doors thrown open and doors thrown down, and then moves on. Because water refuses to keep anything that does not wish to float. Dawn discovers what night arranged. Ramps lowered for cargo that is not grain. Thresholds stained with the day's new meaning. Banners taken soon because they will not be needed where the wind is going. The beach receives the army that held it for a decade with a new quiet. The sea shows empty, as if it had no memory at all of 10,000 wakes. On the ramparts, gulls take the places where elders leaned and discussed nothing. After this, the world does what worlds do. It scatters facts into journeys. Some ships find home with the first fair wind and relearn the sound of a gate swinging inward. Some tack for years against weather and stubbornness. Some reach harbor and discover that the storm was waiting inside the door. One captain begins a map that refuses to be finished, visiting islands whose names are excuses for delays of the heart. Another brings a bride out into a morning that seems underlined in gold. A third walks into a house where bronze remembers where it was hung, and a lamp that has burned too steadily casts a knife-shaped shadow along the wall. On the far side, a new city will someday rise on a hill that faces two seas, carrying the household gods saved in night's quiet. Poets will test the right length of breath for everything that happened, and argue kindly with one another across centuries. The horse's wood will rot into earth. Its story will grow new ribs whenever mouths need them. The square where it once stood goes back to market mornings, to dust, to rain, to weddings that invite everyone. The plain finishes its role, by becoming simply ground again. Grass returns. The river keeps its shoulder under the land and speaks to the sea in the old tone. The wind skims the empty harbor and forgets the names of ships. On the slope where smoke once wrote itself into the sky, stones warm under noon and cool at dusk, as they did before banners, before oaths, before bronze and pitch decided to call each other by nicknames. In the end, pride did what pride always does. It lit a small, bright fire and invited the world to gather around it. The world came, admired, argued, swore oaths, built engines, made songs, and kept watch. Then the fire learned to travel, and a city learned what it costs to mistake a gift for a guarantee. The sea went on. The constellations above the masts and towers held their places, and the tale that began with an apple and a promise resolved itself into ash, salt, and memory. Each carried forward, each capable of being kind, each offering a different kind of light to anyone who needs to see.